Hello, it is me. As you obviously know, I am just a guy trying to make a good fan fiction on YouTube. And I would like to not only welcome you back, but I would also like to apologize for a few things. One would be I apologize and I mean to correct my broken French on the words pulses because I said posters last chapter. And the second thing I would like to address is that I apologize for not uh, conceding to a fan's request. Unfortunately, Wanda Maximoff slash the Scarlet Witch will not be coming into this chapter or the next, but she will come, I promise. And second, well, technically third, really. Third thing I would like to correct is that I know I promised not to do this whole part two, part three thing, but I didn't want this to last too long. And I believe the fourth thing is that I should apologize for actually not. Uh, okay, I kind of forgot what the fourth thing was, but I promise that this one is actually about the build up, not really actiony, but this is a build up towards fighting Grodd and Pietro's chance to be Quicksilver out on the field. And I'm pretty sure you don't want me to talk about this too long, so let's go ahead and just get into this.
Chapter 6. Grodd Returns Part 1. Pietro was sadly laying in his small blue glass box and truly thinking about what he did, and questioning whether it was wrong to show Dr. Light how much he cared, 'cause look where it got him. His thoughts were interrupted by his door sliding open. Pietro saw his glass door open and looked up and saw, to both his confusion and surprise, no one standing there. He didn't know whether or not this was some kind of trick, but he knew he hated it in there. Pietro walked through the door and turned right, and found nobody. Pietro decided not to run because he thought that'd make him a lot more obvious if it was a trick, so he walked down the hall with caution. I don't understand. What's happening? Who's? Then he felt something or someone hug him, but strangely enough he saw no one and nothing. Pietro's confusion only grew when he started feeling kisses being planted on his neck and shoulder. Pietro then felt arms wrap around his back and shoulders and pulled him into someone's front. He tried to push them off but they held him tight and kept kissing his neck and shoulders and started nibbling at his ear. Wait. What? Who's doing this? Pietro asked in a loud whisper. Shish, relax, a familiar voice whispered. It's just me. Wait, Linda, Pietro asked. Yes, but keep your voice down or we'll be caught. Linda said. Okay. Wait, how are you doing this? Pietro quickly asked. I'm manipulating the fiber optics so that I can control the light around my body and make myself invisible, Linda answered. And I'm not just doing that. This whole building runs on fiber optics that operate on pulses of light, and since I can control light, I can make this whole place do almost anything, which is why the alarms aren't going off right now. Linda finished. Wow, that's pretty impressive. Pietro said. Thank you, Linda replied with a smile. And also thank you for rescuing me. I understand why you hated it in there. Pietro said. Oh, it was my pleasure. Linda said, hugging him from behind. But, do you think you can let go? I kind of have a thing about people touching me from behind, especially when they're invisible. Pietro asked nervously. Oh, I'm so sorry. Linda quickly replied, letting him go. It's fine, let's just find your clothes and get out of here. Pietro replied. Pietro ran around with his super speed both trying to find Dr. Light's clothes, and the super suit that Cisco made for him. Pietro managed to find both and ran back into that very room in half of a second. He called out her name a few times until he was answered with a shish, I may have hacked in their optic system, but you can still get caught if you're not careful. Linda said in a loud whisper. Right, sorry. I've got your suit, but you'll have to be visible in order to put it on. Pietro whispered. Well, okay. Linda replied. She turned visible, but Pietro turned around almost immediately and apologized. Sorry, he said, embarrassed. It's not like it's anything you haven't seen before. Linda replied, blushing. Pietro handed her the suit with his eyes closed, and said, I know, but I'm still trying to respect you and your privacy. Pietro said. That's actually really sweet. Linda replied, smiling and blushing. She got dressed, and told him to open his eyes. Okay, let's get out of here. Linda said. Then Pietro said, yeah, about that. I kind of think we should stay. Barry's my friend. Pietro said. What? Why? Linda asked, getting upset. Well, I saw Barry struggling to walk for some reason, and I think he was hurt. Pietro said, worried. They locked you in their glass prison, just for talking to me. Dr. Light said. I know that, and I'm just as upset about that as you, 'cause I hated it in there too, but Barry's my friend. He and his friends took me in and took care of me, when I had no place else to go, so I owe him for that. Pietro said. Linda thought for a second and said, okay, fine. But I'm staying here with you, and I'm doing all this for you. You're the only one that made being in that box bearable, so I owe you, Pietro. She replied. Pietro blushed a bit and said thank you. They both smiled as they looked into each other's eyes, and shared a romantic kiss. With Barry, Cisco, Caitlin, Iris, and Joe. How long until I'm fully healed? Barry asked. The initial MRI I took a week ago showed a complete dislocation of the T12 to L1 inner space of the thoracolumbar junction. But this is the MRI I took this morning. It's remarkable, but you're almost completely healed. Caitlin said. I'm still having trouble breathing. Barry said. That's totally normal with a spinal injury. It should clear up soon. Caitlin pointed out. Now in the wheelchair that the fake Wells was in last year, Barry turned it around and sadly looked at his flash suit. We'll get you back in that suit, Bear. Real quick, trust me. Joe said. Barry gave a sad and unconvincing nod. What are we going to do about Zoom? Barry asked. No sign of him since Cisco nailed him with that tranq dart. Joe said. And I haven't vibed since then. Cisco said. Maybe Zoom's not coming back. Iris said. I highly doubt that, Wells said as he walked in. Which is why I'm going to go do something about it. Wells finished. What do you mean go do something about it? Caitlin asked. I need access to your breach room, and your speed cannon. Why's that? Barry asked. 'Cause Barry, it's time for me to go home. Harry Wells says. So you show up on our Earth, screw everything up, and now you want to go home. Sounds very familiar. Joe says. Once again, that wasn't me. I need to go take care of Zoom once and for all, before anyone else gets killed. Harry Wells says. How do you plan on doing that? Barry asked. I'll think of something. Ramon, will you escort me to the speed cannon? Harry asks. Though Pietro walked in behind Harry, no one noticed him, so he stayed behind until he was ready to be noticed by everyone else. No, you can't go through the breach. Caitlin said. Yes he can. Jay taught us how to send people. Cisco said. That's not what I mean. If you can figure out how to stop Zoom on your Earth, you can figure out how to do it here, Caitlin said. We need you to stay here until we defeat Zoom, Dr. Wells. Caitlin finished. What I need, Dr. Snow, is to return home. And I'm going to do that, with or without your assistance. Harry said before walking in a slightly smaller room. What are you doing? If Harry wants to go. Bye. Cisco said. Like it or not, Cisco, we need his help. Caitlin said. I don't think another plan from Wells is what we need. Joe said. Yeah, I mean the last bright idea he had nearly got Barry killed. Iris pointed out. I know, but Jay's gone, and Dr. Wells knows Zoom better than anyone. So, until Barry's back on his feet again, we're going to need to keep Wells around in case Zoom returns. Caitlin said. Caitlin, if he doesn't want to be here, we're better off without him, let him go. Barry said to Caitlin. I can't do that. Not yet. Caitlin said. I can help until Barry gets better. Pietro said, now making his presence known. Everyone was startled and turned to see Pietro standing at the entrance. Dr. Light was there too, but she was invisible and decided that she was not ready to be seen by Team Flash yet. What are you doing out of the pipeline? Cisco asked. Joe immediately aimed his gun at Pietro. Well, Pietro didn't know whether or not to tell them, and he was nervous. Well, I got out for 2 reasons. Pietro started. 2. Iris asked. Okay, I'll admit I did it because Linda was still here. And she wanted to stay, so she made the prison release me. Pietro confessed. That's how you got out, but why are you still here? Iris asked. I saw that Barry was hurt, so I was hoping to help him in any way I could. Pietro said. Are you going to tell us where Linda is? Iris asked. Not if you all plan on putting her back in that glass box prison. Pietro said. She's a thief that robbed the Central City Bank. She tried to kill her doppelganger, so that's attempted murder, and she escaped her cell in the pipeline. So as far as I'm concerned, she's a fugitive, and if you don't tell us where she is now, then you're just aiding and abetting. Joe said sternly while glaring at Pietro. Pietro didn't know what any of that meant, considering he's unfamiliar with most of America's laws, but since Joe's a cop, he has a hunch that it wasn't good for him. Please, don't put her back in there. She'll never do any of those things again. I'll make sure of that, but I also owe her, and Barry, my life. So I promise them both I will help you, and as far as Dr. Light is concerned, I swear I will take full responsibility, whatever it takes, just please, don't put her in that box again. Pietro explained. Everyone except Joe was looking at Barry, as he was thinking whether or not to give both him and Dr. Light another chance. But when he looked at his legs, he was reminded of how Zoom beat him to a bloody pulp, and how he broke his back, and how close he came to never walking again. He was frustrated and mad at both Zoom and the situation, but he was also smart enough to know that getting help from another speedster is the best thing that can happen right now till he's back at 100%, so he nodded. Okay, you can stay, and Dr. Light can as well, and we won't put her in the pipeline, but all that being said, please don't make me regret it. All right, Barry asked. Everyone except Joe nodded, and he reluctantly nodded too. Pietro nodded back at everyone else and said to them, I'll do my best to not make you regret this, I promise you all. He said, looking around the room at everyone. Although he did notice Joe's glaring and reluctant face as he lowered his gun at him, Pietro didn't pay him very much mind. Then Dr. Light turns visible and awkwardly waved at everyone. Everyone except Barry stood up in fear and caution, and Joe quickly points his gun at Dr. Light. Come on, Joe, put the gun away. Barry said with a hint of gloom in his voice. She's a criminal, Barry, Joe said shortly and cautiously while keeping his firearm pointed at Dr. Light. Both of Dr. Light's palms were glowing, pointing them at Joe, cautiously. Joe, you don't have to point the gun at her. And Linda, put your hands down. Barry said. Both of them listened to Barry, but Joe had his finger still on the trigger, and was still staring Dr. Light down, and Dr. Light was doing the same to Joe distrustingly. Hey, she's part of the deal. If anyone puts her in that glass box prison, or if anything happens to her, I'm leaving, and taking her with me. Pietro said, standing between Dr. Light and Joe. At least try to get along. Barry said to Joe as he reluctantly lowered his gun. Okay, fine, but while you're both here, neither of you are allowed to leave town, got it? Joe asked sternly. Dr. Light and Pietro nodded. Then an alarm goes off, and Cisco said loudly, oh snap, metahuman attack. Then everyone had a look of panic on their face. Nope, my bad, that's just an alert, for me. Cisco said. Iris raised a curious eyebrow. For what? Iris asked. Oh, it's just a reminder, I have a date in an hour. Both Iris and Barry made sly and interested grins as they asked Cisco. Oh, with who? Iris asked. With the lovely Kendra Saunders, the barista at Jitters, Cisco was saying with a delighted gleam in his eyes. Ah, she makes a mean latte. I think we're going to go out for dinner, and a movie, and if I'm lucky, maybe some breakfast. Cisco said, mumbling the rest. Breakfast? Why breakfast? Barry asked. But before Cisco could answer, Joe laughed and said that both Barry and Iris were messing with him. After Cisco walked away, Barry's cell phone rang and he answered. Barry saw that it was Patty on the caller ID before answering it. Patty, hey. Barry greeted as he answered. Hey, I hear you're still sick. Patty said. Yeah, it's a nasty bug. Barry said in an almost melancholy manner. I make a mean chicken noodle soup from scratch. I can bring some by later if you like. Patty said with a friendly and generous tone in her voice. That's sweet of you. It really is. I just would feel terrible if you caught any of this. Besides, I love the canned stuff. Barry was grimacing at his own words. Patty made a sad expression before she said, Okay, well, try and stay off your feet. Oh yeah, believe me I am. Barry said, shifting in the electrical wheelchair. You sure you're okay? You sound like something's up. Patty said in a worried way. No, I'm fine. I'm just not myself right now. Barry said. Patty still looked a little worried and suspicious, but she said, Okay, well I hope to see you soon, and feel better. Patty said sadly. Thanks, Barry said. At a place called Von Pharmaceuticals. A bunch of scientists were looking through microscopes, and a man named Jeffrey Shore told a man named Brian to let a concoction sit overnight, and he'll see him tomorrow. Then before Dr. Jeffrey Shore knew it, flashes of syringes and masked doctors flashed through his head, and he was acting almost hypnotically, as if he was just a robot that wasn't conscious of his actions. Dr. Shore? Brian asked in concern. Then Dr. Shore walked to a glass container, punched open the glass door, and snatched out a large can. Doctor, what are you doing? You can't take that out of here. Brian said before Dr. Shore hit him in the face with the silver container, and walked all the way outside and put the can down. He appeared to have snapped out of it, and looked confused as to where he was, and why the back of his hand was bleeding. He then turned around and looked up in horror and asked in fear, What are you? And then he was hit in the air and hit a sign, and fell back to the ground, dead. Then out of the shadows, showed the face of a gorilla that looked angry, saying telepathically, Foolish human, I am Grodd. On the next day, CCPD was on the scene, turning it into a crime scene, and gathering evidence from whatever they could. Detective Joe West was walking in on the scene, as Patty Spivot gathered a bunch of strange-looking hairs. Patty, what did you find? Joe asked. I found some weird-looking hairs all over the street. I'ma run them through the database and see what I can find. Patty answered. Over there, the victim's name is Dr. Jeffrey Shore. He's a bioengineer here at Von Pharmaceuticals. This is the second dead lab tech in 2 weeks. Patty said to Joe. That ain't a coincidence. Joe said with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, and like the one other tech, he had stolen a serum from their storage cooler. Patty said. Really? What kind of serum? Joe asked. It's called Cortexin. It's used to treat encephalopathy, blood disease in the brain. The serum's missing, but his colleagues found him here, a couple minutes later dead. Patty explained. Joe looked down at him, then said, he didn't get far. Then Patty crouched down to lift the yellow tarp and say, he died from blunt force trauma to the head. Oh, and apparently a lot of it. Joe said. Yeah, check this out. Patty said as she pointed to a warning sign with a blood mark on it. Is that his blood? Joe asked. Point of impact. Patty said. Okay, can you run through what you told me to her? Joe said, pointing to a female forensic assistant. And see if you can get anything else, and if the cases are linked. Joe finishes. Sure thing. Patty said. She gave the female forensic scientist the evidence she gathered, and said that she'd be right with her, but she quickly went over and asked Detective West how Barry was feeling. He said that he was just headed to see him now. Joe also said that Barry asked him to bring him some of his homemade chicken noodle soup, 'cause he hates the canned stuff. Though, Patty said, don't we all? Patty was both confused and a little upset, considering she remembered that Barry said that he prefers the canned stuff. Back at STAR Labs. As Barry was on the treadmill walking at a fast pace, then slowly went into a sprint, both Joe and Iris smiled at Barry. Pietro and Dr. Light were also watching, seeing that he can walk and run perfectly now. Joe shouts, "Push yourself, Bear." Then as Barry had orange lightning flickering around him, Barry remembers getting beaten up by Zoom, and how Zoom broke his back as well. Then he falls on the treadmill, and then it flung him onto the floor. Everyone who was watching quickly ran in and asked if he was okay. He said that he wasn't doing great right now. Iris said that if he'd talk to them, they'd help him, but Barry said that no one can help him this time, and that she wouldn't understand. Both Joe and Iris exchanged looks, then told both Pietro and Dr. Light that they should leave the room and give Barry and her dad a minute. With Pietro and Dr. Light. "Wow, he's got some really fast legs," Linda said. "Hey, my legs are just as fast," Pietro said to Linda. "Really?" Linda asked, intrigued. "I've been training hard ever since I met Team Flash," Pietro said. "That's impressive," Linda replied, and gave Pietro a kiss. "I know, I just need to keep working and training hard, and then I'll be able to take out Zoom," Pietro said. Linda was surprised then grew a little nervous about what she was about to say. "Yeah, about Zoom. I'm thinking that maybe I shouldn't come with you guys when you take him down," Linda said. "What? Why?" Pietro asked. "It's just, Zoom nearly killed me and my doppelganger last time, so forgive me for being a little scared and traumatized at the idea of facing him again," Linda said. "I understand, but we're going to need all the help we can get if we want to take him down," Pietro said. "I know, and I will help, just not on the field, but I can help here at the lab, or I could stay here, and protect the city while you guys are away," Linda said. "Okay, whatever you think is best," Pietro said. "You know, you're the only reason I'm willing to fight against Zoom, as well as the only reason why I'm still here," Linda said. "Yeah, and I owe you too, so if you're not comfortable fighting with us, then I can stay here with you, and protect the city while everyone else goes after Zoom," Pietro said. "Thanks, I appreciate that, and I can help the other two scientists protect the city, and I can make sure they don't get hurt or kidnapped again," Linda said. "That's great, but I'll ask Barry first, see what he says," Pietro said. "All right, but if he says yes, then that means that I'm going to need a new suit, something more badass than what I have now," Linda said. "Don't worry, I'm sure Cisco can whip you up a new one that'll blow your mind. He did so for me," Pietro said. "Wow, thanks," Linda said as she kissed Pietro on the cheek. "Since you talk like this guy is a genius at what he does, maybe he can make me a suit that makes me look hot, as well as a badass," Linda said. Pietro laughed, and said, "Yeah, he can do that." With Caitlin and Cisco in the breach room. "I know I keep asking, but have you read any reports or anything recently about a bird man attacking anywhere?" Cisco asked Caitlin. Caitlin smirked a little and said with a skeptical expression, "There's no such thing as a bird man, Cisco," Caitlin said. "Okay, like that's a stretch, in this city. Look, I know what I vibed. It was a man, with these big wide wings, it was crazy," Cisco said. Then Caitlin laughed at first, then she saw flashes of syringes and masked doctors flash through her head, and she was acting hypnotically. "What if it was an angel?" Cisco asked with a laugh. "Yeah, it was an angel," Cisco said smiling in thought. Caitlin looked at Cisco blankly, then punched Cisco in the face. "What the hell's wrong with you?" Cisco yelled in pain. Then Caitlin walked away and started walking out of STAR Labs, acting almost hypnotically. With Iris and Joe West. As they were walking down a hall in STAR Labs, they were talking about how Barry was fine, according to his test results on his injuries, but it was as if something was holding him back. But then Iris said that if we can't get through to him, then we should try and find the only one that can talk to him. Then Joe's phone started vibrating. He looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Patty, and said to Iris that he would have to take that call, considering it's work, and he will talk to her later. He accepted the call and quickly asked, "Patty, what's up?" Joe asked. "Turns out, that our dead scientist cases are linked. Patty said. Okay, hit me, Joe quickly said. The other scientist stole a large quantity of a Resetum drug, typically used to treat patients with vertigo. Patty said. Okay, so we have 2 stolen drugs, one for treating blood disorders of the brain, and one for vertigo. What's the connection? Joe asked. Well, they are both nootropic drugs, used to enhance intelligence. Patty said. Hey did you get any results from the hairs you found? Joe asked, though he already had a feeling that he already knew. Yes, I did. Apparently they were all over the other crime scene too. The weird thing is, they're not human hairs, they're hairs from but Joe already said, from a gorilla. Before Patty had a chance to finish. Yes, how did you know? Patty questioned. But Joe said, Patty, I got to go. Joe abruptly hung up and quickly walked back to the main lab. With Barry, Pietro, and Earth 2 Linda in the main lab. I know this might be a bad time for you, but I have to ask, since you are not feeling very well right now, would it be okay for me to protect Central City? You know, until you're back at fighting speed again. Pietro asked. Barry turned the electric wheelchair around so that he could look at his suit again. Honestly, I still feel like you need more training, and if what Cisco said about your speed is true, then you might even have more potential than even most of us can imagine. But for right now, it makes sense that since I'm not at 100% right now, another speedster should take my place. Barry said. So you're saying yes? Pietro asked with enthusiastic anticipation. Barry sadly looked at his suit, then sadly looked down, then nodded. Yes. Thank you, Barry. I promise I won't let you down. Pietro said with excitement and enthusiasm. Linda made a small smile at Pietro, seeing that he finally got what he wanted. A chance to prove himself. Then Cisco walked in and asked. Did Caitlin come through here? No, Barry simply said. She just hit me, in the face, and ran away. Cisco said both angrily and curiously. Joe quickly ran in, yelling, Grodd. Grodd's back. Pietro and Linda were the only ones that looked confused. Who's that? Linda asked. Oh come on, don't you remember last year when? Cisco stopped when he saw Pietro and Linda. Never mind. Grodd is an intelligent telepathic gorilla that we fought last year. Cisco says to Pietro and Linda. Why would you fight a telepathic gorilla? Linda asked, looking even more confused. Well, because he escaped and went on a rampage in the city. Cisco said. But that's not important right now. Caitlin's being mind-controlled, and we've gotta find her. Cisco said. Then as Cisco looked at all the security cameras, one showed Caitlin walking out a door, and Gorilla Grodd was following behind her. There she is, Cisco said, pointing to the screen. Let's move, Joe said, grabbing his gun. I'm coming too, Barry said, getting out of his wheelchair. I want to help too, but I don't know this place all that well. Pietro said. Cisco, Joe, Barry with a cane, and Linda, from Earth 2, were all rushing outside. To their disappointments, no one was there. Pietro ran up to the rest of them in a bright white flash, and said that he ran everywhere he could, and he didn't see them anywhere. Everyone exchanges a disappointed look and heads back into the main lab. When they all went back in, Harry Wells was also with them. I'm continually amazed by the similarities between our two worlds, Harry Wells said. You got talking gorillas on your Earth too? Joe asked. Oh yeah, Harry said. Remind me never to go there. Joe says sarcastically. Ramon, why would this? Grodd, abduct Dr. Snow? Harry asked. I don't know, it doesn't make sense. She was always so nice to him. He mind-controlled 2 lab technicians to steal chemicals that enhance intelligence. He wants her for something. Joe says. Well, looks like he left his bachelor pad in the sewers. Cisco said. Grodd's a big-ass gorilla. He can't just waltz through downtown in the middle of the day without anyone noticing. Joe said. Right, if there were sightings, we'd be able to approximate his location. Harry said. I can call CCPD. They can access the tip hotline. Send over a file of Grodd's recent attacks. Good. Harry quickly said. We got to get her back. Cisco said, sounding serious. We will, Harry said. When Cisco and Harry left the room, Joe noticed Barry staring sadly at the cane he walks with while sitting in the electric chair he was in. Barry, you can't blame yourself for this. There's nothing you could have done, Joe said reassuringly. Barry was still frowning as he said, I don't even have my speed. How are we supposed to save her from Grodd? Barry asked. Are you forgetting that we have Pietro, and everyone else here? We have plenty of people who are willing to help here. And you may not have your legs back, but you still have that brain of yours. Use it, Joe said to Barry. Later with Caitlin. Caitlin opened her eyes, to see that she's in a dark and eerie room with ashy windows. Caitlin's confusion only grew. Then she heard a voice, practically in her head, that said her name like a whisper. She looked up and saw a larger-than-average gorilla staring right at her. Grodd, Caitlin said curiously. Grodd hopped down from the beams above her, and landed right in front of Caitlin. Why did you bring me here? Caitlin asked. Need help, Grodd said. I don't understand, Caitlin said. How did I become Grodd? He asked. It's a long story, Grodd. The dark matter, from the particle accelerator explosion, that's how this happened, Caitlin said. Grodd walked closer and said only one word. Repeat. Caitlin only looked confused. What do you mean? I don't understand, Caitlin said. Grodd roared at Caitlin and pointed at the collected canisters. Need to repeat, Grodd, he said to Caitlin. You want me to make more like you? I don't know how to do that, Caitlin said uncertainly. Learn, Grodd growled to Caitlin.
End of Chapter 6, Part 1. Now I would like to go ahead and make a shout out to Audrey Victory and ask if there was anything particular in Part 2 that you would have liked in this story. Although I am not going to yet get Wanda into this story, I assume that you would at least like for Barry's father to be somewhere introduced in there, because if so, I actually am including him in there. And as far as Part 2 is concerned, Pietro is finally going to get his chance to shine, in case anybody was wondering. So, I will see you in Part 2. See you all later then.